Greetings, everyone. I'm Vince Staley, Executive Director of Media Impact Funders, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to our program today, Listen, Learn, Connect, Cultural Organizations and Digital Strategy in the COVID-19 Era. We've got a great group of presenters and panelists for our discussion today, and I can see we've got a distinguished group of experts in media, philanthropy, and the arts signed up for this discussion. So we hope that we'll hear from all of you in questions and comments as we get into this discussion. We're always pleased to highlight the work of one of our most important members, the Wyncote Foundation, and we're especially delighted when we could feature the erudite reports of Sarah Lutman and her colleagues at the 8 Bridges workshop, as we are doing today. And it's a great privilege to partner with our colleagues at Grantmakers in the Arts to spark a dialogue with media and arts funders on these important issues. You're all very fortunate to have as your guide an expert moderator for today's discussion, Eddie Torres, who's president and CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. And I'll get out of the way now and allow Eddie to take it from here. So thanks, Eddie.
Thank you so much. And I want to say a great big thank you to you, Vince, and Roshni Melia, and Sabira there at Media Impact Funders. I am so grateful to be able to partner with you on this important report. Listen, Learn, Connect, Cultural Organizations and Digital Strategy in the COVID-19 era. And I want to say, I want to join you in thanking the Wyncote Foundation, the Haas family, and Kristen Ross, and thank you to Sarah Lutman. We're going to be joined today by Tom Collins, president of the Barnes Foundation, Ralph Benya, producing artistic director of Mai Theater Company, and David Taylor, CEO of Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture. And so before we get into a dialogue, to establish some context, I want to hand it off to Sarah Lutman at 8 Bridges Workshop. Sarah.
Thank you so much, Eddie, and welcome everyone to the official launch of our report, which is hot off the digital press. For the report, we met with, in the virtual sense, 29 cultural organizations to talk to them about their digital practice during COVID. And the organizations were either nominated by one of our advisors, we found them through media reports, or through other ways of just scouring the internet for who was doing what. And through these observations and through our advisors, we were able to identify some pretty spectacular work, which you are going to hear about today. So I'm just going to speak very briefly about what some of our findings and takeaways were, and then we'll get right to the organizations themselves. 2 of the qualities we were looking for were actually organizations that had made some investment previously in digital. It might not look anything like what they did during COVID, but they had gotten started in one way or another. And before we go any further, I want to say that there are a lot of organizations for whom that is not true. Because of money or other questions of access, they have not been able to make similar investments. And I think at the end of this report, when we get to recommendations, you'll see that we really hope that one takeaway from this conversation is for more people to consider investments in technical capacity to be as important as some of the other capacities that we've learned to think about as we think about resilient organizations. We also were looking for some evidence of a long-term influence from the COVID-related activities, that it wasn't just something they did and it went away, but something that had given them an aha about what may be possible in the future. So our takeaways, and not every organization reflected all of these characteristics, but these are organizations who can articulate a particularly convincing and inspiring sense of mission and around who they exist for, on whose behalf they do their work. We originally had this in our report as a sense of calling, that people who, when COVID hit, did not shrink but rose to their communities. The second thing is that they didn't wait until they had a grand plan. They boldly tried things rather immediately and decided to learn to learn. We have some quotes in the report and in the profiles of basically the leaders saying, doing nothing is a decision we don't want to make. We're going to try things and see what happens. This results in a particularly nimble organization that these leaders describe as now benefiting them in unexpected ways in other realms. The third thing is that as the pandemic wore on, or should I say wears on, people went from a simple idea of transferring what they used to do in person to digital platforms to really realizing they had a different tool set in hand and that they were able to do new things with new tools. And the three people that we have today will talk more about this, but things that were made to be digital were a huge learning during the pandemic. And the fourth takeaway is people listening to what their audiences responded to and doing more of that. And I'm not talking about the quantity of how many people did a particular thing, but the quality of experiences that people were connecting with. And then our fifth takeaway is that there really are no easy answers. For those of you who are hoping that the outcome of this would be everyone needs a subscription model, or everyone needs to be free, or everyone needs a paywall, or everyone needs one digital staff person, that really was not the result. Our result was much more, we need to learn much more about the potential for our institutions to reach new people in new ways. So some of our recommendations, beyond prioritizing technical capacity, which I previously mentioned, is the hope that funders will consider supporting a range of experiments and to share learning around them. What we need are more people trying things and more people telling each other how it's going. We really want to remind grant makers present that digital provides access to people who there may have been more people who needed certain kinds of access during the pandemic, but there are a lot of people who benefit from access, whether there's a pandemic or not. And several of our organizations learned a lot about that. Another recommendation is that grand plans can come later. What we need now are small starts, and people learn from the small starts, and they can make their grand plans after more learning has occurred. And then finally, there are more recommendations, but we're at a moment where a kind of bridge funding that allows people to continue to develop these practices while returning to in-person work could be a particularly effective way to help continue learning in organizations that have made an investment. I just want to thank the Wyncote Foundation, which is a longtime client and colleagues of 8 Bridges, and to me personally, for supporting open-ended inquiry in the cultural sector. There was no RFP, there was no scope of work, that exactly what you have to do, or even exactly what we might learn. And it's so rare in the field to have a curious partner who's willing to go on a journey with you. And I know that David Haas, the vice chair of Wyncote, is with us today, and I'd like to publicly thank him for this report and the work that led to it, and for a previous report, which is now 8 years old, believe it or not, which was a digital innovation report in 2014. So I'm going to be quiet and go off camera and listen to our awesome guests. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to go ahead and get us started with a discussion. I want to ask all the participants today, as questions occur to you, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have a section where we can turn to the audience for audience questions. But now, thanks to digital, you don't need to wait. So please feel free to put them in the chat. And at the end, I can go ahead and read them from the chat, or we can just ask you to go ahead and unmute yourselves. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and monopolize our speaker's time myself, because that's my job. And so I want to start off with, one of the key things that you learned in the report was that central to who you are, the organizations that were profiled, central to who you are is who you are for. And so I basically just want to take a moment and learn more about each of your organizations from the perspective of who you are for. And then from there, sort of evolve into a discussion of how that has expanded, changed, deepened now that you've been able to bring your work online and engage folks in a different way. So I'm going to start with you, David, just because you're closest to me in my little Zoom box. So David, talk to us a bit about who the Gantt is for, who you serve, and then talk to us a little bit about how that has perhaps changed.
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. I think one of the things that I'm happy to be here today, and I'm certainly appreciative to this opportunity to speak about, technology and digital experience. For us as an institution, we are a 48-year-old institution that has been on a journey during that period of time. Part of that journey, we think back to 1974, who we were kind of founded to be was really to serve the African-American community. And probably over the last, 3 decades, that has continued to evolve, that our role now is to really tell the story of the African-American people for the benefit of all. And how do we do that? And I think, prior to COVID, that was certainly our mission and our focus to do that. During COVID, we realized digital platform gave us a greater opportunity to be more effective at doing that, because now we can reach people in places that we normally could not get to them. It also set the script for, so that people did not necessarily see this as a Black institution that's just for Black folks. All of a sudden now, they began to kind of embrace the idea that this is an institution that celebrates the accomplishments of Black folks for the benefit of all. And that's our audience, really for the benefit of all, but showing how we can really showcase this amazing work of a great people. And digital platforms allowed us to do that. It allowed us to reach people across the country, really, to be able to kind of share and engage them. And I think it also gave courage to folks who may not have walked through our doors, but all of a sudden now I had a chance to say, let me engage, because I'm in a safe place, it may be in my home, that I can engage, and I don't have to feel, whatever trepidations I have, they're not issues. So that's kind of what the journey that we've kind of been on with digital post-COVID.
Fantastic. And how about you, Tom? Same question.
Sure. Well, this year is the Barnes 100th anniversary. We were founded in 1922 by Albert Barnes, who had a kind of uniquely inclusive and democratic approach to education, both about and through the arts. And during his lifetime, the foundation was a very active educational institution. He was particularly engaged with the support for and advocacy on behalf of working class people, women, and people of color in the Philadelphia region. When Barnes died in 1951, things began to change, and in the subsequent, 60 some years, 70 years, let's call it, in the subsequent 70 years, that part of the story, that part of his legacy, the part that was about what we're now calling DEAI and social justice issues, was really sort of disappeared from the operations of the foundation. The adult education program was pretty much what remained of his initial impulse. And so we moved from Marion, our suburban home, to Center City, Philadelphia 10 years ago last month. So it's our 10th anniversary in our new home here on the Parkway. And after a couple of years of operating in that building, and just around the time I arrived, we sat down, created the first strategic plan for the institution in decades. And one of the big, well, I would say the largest impetus there was how do we reconnect with that original part of Barnes' mission? How do we reconnect with that legacy? We knew at that time that our audiences were overwhelmingly white, older, economically privileged, and so forth. And so we created, in the context of that plan, our first diversity and inclusion statement that was very explicit about the fact that we believe our audience, our walk-in audience, all of our audiences for all of our programs should mirror the diversity of Philadelphia, whether it was pre-K through 12 or adult education or a walk-in visitor. And so to support that goal, that key goal in the plan, we worked with an organization at Temple University's business school called Be Heard Philly, which has put together what they argue is a perfect focus group representing Philadelphia and all of its complexity and diversity. And we worked with them to sort of gauge how we were doing, how visible we were throughout the community by zip code, what kinds of experiences people from less well-served zip codes were receiving, how our pre-K through 12 service mapped onto adult visitation, and on and on and on. We asked all these kinds of questions about audience. And out of that proposal, or out of that research, we created a number of digital initiatives sort of right out of the chute. So this is 5 years ago plus, right out of the chute, that were meant to help us begin to connect with audiences we weren't reaching. And probably the best example is a very low-tech, inexpensive virtual reality tour of the Barnes, which our educators began taking out into the community, first in branch libraries, and then later in senior centers, rehab centers, community centers around the city in underserved neighborhoods, and particularly those neighborhoods that we were really missing by zip code. So that weren't being really touched by our pre-K through 12 program or by our social impact programs or general visitation. So our VR program, taking these tools out into the libraries, we would do meetups, we would do virtual tours in libraries on weekends, and then invite all the participants to come visit the Barnes for free. We paid for transportation, free admission, and a tour with the same cohort that they had toured with virtually in the library, and the same educators. And we had something on, it was in excess of 36 or 37% uptake. So on a subsequent weekend, between I think 37 and 46% of people that did those virtual tours actually came to the Barnes. And then we reinforced that experience by creating something called an community access pass, a community pass, which was a free membership for a full year for participant and guests, 4 guests or 3 guests, with all the benefits of membership, free admission, discounts in the store, discounts in the shop, invitations to our programs, and so forth, as a way to kind of reinforce that first experience of getting over the threshold. And the vast majority of those people that took us up on that invitation that first year not only had no experience with the Barnes, but had really very little experience with cultural institutions. And I think we served 400 or 500 individuals that first year. This year, we're hoping to grow that to between 750 and 800. And the community pass, now we've distributed about 6,000 of those since we first kicked off this program, and we hope really to amp that up. And the community pass enables us to continue to collect data about the experiences of the people we're inviting into the institution through this VR program and related programs. So that was kind of the opening salvo in our digital exploration with regard to audience engagement. And I could go on, as you can probably tell, but I won't.
No, that's beautiful, and I do have follow-up questions, but let me ask you, Ralph, the same question. Tell us about who My Theater Company is for, and who you've managed to expand that to or deepen your relationships with.
Yeah, so My is we're in our 33rd season. We are focused on developing new theater works for and by Asian American in the New York metropolitan area. During the shutdown, this became a challenge. And with the help of the New York Community Trust, the Wyncote Foundation, and the Doris Duke, we were able to buy digital equipment, film equipment. And we did this specifically to allow artists to be able to do this from their homes. So they were all virtual with a linking platform. since we did this and we streamed it all for free, we reached 3 million people in Asia. A lot of them from India, the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Japan. Audiences that we would have never, ever reached. So this is a big aha moment for us about how we can leverage this technology to bring theater to underserved, to audiences globally, but also to underserved audiences in the United States. Digital technology for us is a democratizing practice because it gives the means of creation and distribution back to the artists. Anybody can stream their work on our platform. And that for me is a big, big change in the way we think of how theater should be experienced and made. Theater artists have very little agency in making their work and distributing it because they're always relying on producing institutions. This way, they have a direct access to their audience. We are unable to monetize that at the moment, but for me, that's for later. The other thing is that we have begun to experiment in making theater interactive. I think that the argument against digital theater is that it negates the live experience. For me, and for us, that live experience can be, we set it aside because the more important thing for us to be is to tell compelling stories and be relevant with our communities. Our community is at risk currently with anti-Asian violence, all of that stuff. And what they need from me at the moment is not to sell them tickets. It's to bridge communities for strategies on safety, for de-escalation training. So those things for me are for us, we're a small theater company. For us, those became the immediate goals coming out of the pandemic. Thank you.
No, thank you. That's fantastic. And I wanted to ask each of you, obviously Vince's organization and mine serves the funding community. And so these are great opportunities for the grantmaker community to hear what is most helpful from you, and it seems, reviewing the report, that a real need from grantmakers is an enthusiasm for co-learning from the field, not mandating specific solutions, but partnering with you in terms of learning, experimenting, iterating. Can you talk about the experiences that you've had with grantmakers in facilitating learning, joining you in learning, and just basically what's been helpful and what would you recommend grantmakers take up? I'm going to go ahead and reverse the order just because you've already got some momentum going, Ralph. Let me go ahead and start with you.
The best partnerships we've had are long-term. It's not, the past couple of years, a lot of money came in to help us survive. But what we need is long-term partnership because we don't know what to do with digital technology yet. And without sustained investment and commitment to this platform, it's going to die. The interest of live theater, Broadway, and all of that is not digital theater whatsoever. And so right now we are left to raise the money to pay our artists a living wage, to be able to do this kind of work and to sustain the technology, the maintenance of all that equipment. What would be very, very helpful is for funders to sit down with these organizations that are interested with this kind of work and find out how they can intervene and what they can do to sort of sustain it, because there are many, many forces against digital art making.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. And Tom, same question.
Sure. Well, I think the important backdrop of this comment is, I mentioned earlier that our adult education program has always really been the cornerstone of what we've done, the thing we're best known for. It was always a program that, well, for 100 years was conducted exclusively in person in the gallery, and we just assumed that that's the way it needed to be if we hoped to enroll anyone. We were halfway through the spring semester in March of 2020 when we had 360 people, I think, enrolled in adult education programs. Happily, we have great tech infrastructure in our new building and a great staff. So we were able to be remote working the Monday after the Friday we closed. And we were up and running with a fully digital version of that adult education program a week later, which meant in the interim, training the teachers, you could training the users and the whole bit. And over the course of the subsequent, well, toward the end of the year, so was that 9 months or something, we made $750,000 in adult education revenue when we went online. We served that first year something like the people from 46 states and 6 countries, and subsequently that's risen to 50 states and 18 countries outside of the United States. And subsequently, in the last 2 years, we've grown that adult education program now both online and hybrid and in person, all 3 versions together. We've grown at 300+%. We're now enrolling, 3,000 or so people a year in this adult education program with a concomitant increase in revenue. So that's the backdrop. We were only able to do that because, as I said, we already had a fresh infrastructure and a really strong creative technology team. So kudos to them, they're online. So thank you all very much. But we also had, in the context of an endowment campaign, received a substantial endowment gift from the Wyncote Foundation, exclusively to support efforts in digital innovation. And it was digital innovation and audience engagement very specifically. So we were able to use some of that resource to do all the things in the last year or so that we didn't do up front, which is to say, research, train, explore technology options, publicize, and figure out all the different ways we could monetize all of this. And with support from Pew and Knight principally, but from other funders, including William Penn and so forth, we're now in the process of getting ready to launch a proprietary learning, what we're calling our LXP learning experience platform, a distance learning platform to serve both our interactive pre-K through 12 programs, which also grew by 50% in the year that we rolled them out with an online component. We're hoping by the end of the year to launch the first iteration of this program. And we asked ourselves, what is not what we should be doing now, what we should be doing 10 years from now, what technology we should be using. So, and this kind of thing. So with that support up front, we've been able to engage in an iterative process with the right consultants and the right support and so forth to do all the things we should have done the first time. But we couldn't have done it without startup funding, and we couldn't have done it without a certain kind of risk tolerance on the part of the key funders, right? Because, this was iterative at every stage. We filled them in, we made adjustments, we changed what we were doing. We've worked with different vendors, we've explored new technologies and the whole bit. And none of this would have been possible without that startup support and a real patience on the part of what I would call venture philanthropists rather than sort of venture capitalists, because they also see the long-term benefit, right? We're working on modeling revenue streams that could be generated out of this platform and how we open source the technology, all these kinds of things. So the funders were great, but I fear that after we things stabilize and people aren't so worried about all of these institutions going under, this risk tolerance will disappear. And this iterative approach to funding, kind of these progressive projects will also evaporate. So.
No, it's a really good point. I mean, we've actually seen, in the aggregate, a lot of really positive funder responses to the pandemic and just this, situation that we are all in together. And our chief recommendation is to just keep it going. I mean, you've already identified risk tolerance, patience, and long-term investment. David, same question. I mean, what has been helpful and what would you advise grant makers do in light of all of this?
Great question. And, for us, probably 2 years prior to COVID, Wyncote Foundation, I think, invested that approached us about investing in a role for technology innovation. And I think that was huge because it began to plant a seed for a directive of technology where we began to kind of reimagine how technology could impact, our organization and how we could better, how we do different deliverables. Certainly not thinking what COVID impact would be. There would be a country shut down, but it had put us in a position. So in March 2020, when things shut down, within 2 weeks, we were able to find out how we could remain relevant. And I think it's about planting that seed, giving us the latitude to do that. We were able to do some really innovative things, particularly as a small organization with less than 15 staff. We were able to kind of repurpose our team, be able to kind of think about how can we use the tools that were in front of us to be able to reach our audiences and grow our audiences. As we too had opportunities to reach to, through some of our program in 48 different states, 7 different countries, to being able to, which was hugely eye-opening, right? But I would also, recognize Knight in the sense that they were, they gave us the latitude to imagine what that role would be. They did not dictate what that role would be. And since then, they have further invested in us in a significant grant where we're able to imagine how we could take technology and take it forward. And the good news there is, again, it was that patience, as we talked about. But I think a key thing, they allowed us to create the vision that we thought was appropriate for our institution, that we thought, with our team, where we believed how we could impact. So it's afforded us the opportunity to invest in some of that critical staff that typically a cultural institution doesn't have, in terms of people who have the expertise to film and document and create content. So for us, it's about how can we create this content that we could take out and deploy out into the marketplace, to grow our audiences. So I think that kind of patience, that kind of ability to allow us to imagine ourselves and let it be uniquely ours, as opposed to dictating what it might be. And I think that was a key thing. Matter of fact, we were kind of blown away that they almost accepted exactly what we proposed. So that was so it was refreshing, one, but it's also allowed us to stay on point for what we wanted to do. Obviously, we're learning as we go and making adjustments, but we think actually having a digital team in place, something that we didn't have. So when a small organization like ourselves can expand ourselves by 20% in staffing or so, just to focus on digital aspects. And we meet weekly and daily, think about how we're going to go and cross that bridge, to the other side of the ravine. It's amazing to be able to do that. And it's with funders being flexible, like I say, being able to take the risk. All those words are very appropriate to what we're trying to do. And it's those things about monetization and those things should come organically through the organization, where the organization might deem it appropriate or might deem it works. Is what I would certainly continue to encourage.
And Tom, I noticed you have your hand raised.
I just wanted to emphasize something that David just touched on, which is that this is never going to change, right? If funders want us to be engaging in progressive ways with our various audiences, then technology is never not going to be at the forefront of the challenge, the key challenge. And so this can't be a temporary adjustment in funding models. This needs to be a complete rethinking of this priority in philanthropic portfolios.
And let me ask you, going back to the issue of audience engagement, different organizations have different ways of learning from their audience, from their artists, from their stakeholders. And I want to get a sense of what you've been learning throughout this process, sort of how you've been learning it. And also, what has either been surprising for you or also just pleasantly reinforcing, Tom, let's go ahead and start with you.
Sure. Well, we had a pretty good approach to audience surveys of various kinds, both in person, on site, and online. The Be Heard Philly was just the sort of kick, that massive focus group we did was the kickoff. And we built that into most of what we've been doing, again, on site and online since then. But what what we've really leaned into now, particularly with both this community pass, which enables us to regularly communicate with certain audience members or certain stakeholder groups, and also with these adult education, and now with the pre-K through 12 network that is both digital and also organized through the school district, because we've been able to capture a lot more nuanced data. And what we did last year was really lean into this challenge and actually establish a data analytics, an assessment and data analytics staff cohort. And we've actually just hired our first head of data analytics, which is brilliant. And we're just in the process of creating a new CRM for everyone on this call. Probably is groans every time they think about nonprofit CRMs. They're horrible. And we're in the process of creating our own at the present moment. So building this kind of assessment capacity and data analytics function into the CRM we're designing for ourselves. So, I mean, absolutely critical. We're getting better at it. It's expensive. It's time consuming. And as you all know, you have to plan to assess. So it also requires a reboot in the way everyone is thinking about how they design their departmental programs and so forth. So it's a big undertaking, but been very useful.
Excellent. And how about you, David?
I think, for us, it's been very similar. I think in terms of how we engage with people, and again about continue to engage with community. I think that's I think that becomes top of mind about us, build an audience and continue to, connect with our audience in ways, the digital platforms kind of ensure that we have a way to do that, because I think the generations to come are adapt to getting their information a different way than what, my generation was adapt to getting that information. And digital exploration gives us a chance to really meet them where they are. And I think we have to continue to figure that out and explore and create new ways. Because as you just said, much of the tools that we need don't necessarily exist in the nonprofit world for us to be able to do that, whether it's databases, whether it's just the way we think and reimagine as we lead these organizations. Sarah mentioned about being nimble and those kinds of things, which are key. And my focus is always about being entrepreneurial from approach the way we do things and innovative. And we're small enough to be able to kind of do that and pivot quickly. And I think those things are really critical to be able to maximize what the digital platforms give us.
And Ralph, tell us about what you've been learning.
Oh, I've heard from a lot of the people that have consumed our offerings that they want more of it. They want more of it for free. But also, I think what I've learned is that this medium allows us to speak to communities that have been excluded from arts programming because of language barriers. As you know, this country is insistent on English as the language for mainstream America, and there are communities even around New York City that are excluded from this. And by going digital, we've been able to provide subtitles. So what I'm learning is I'm continually learning about all the things that we've taken for granted in the past. I think this pandemic is a reset, not just for our traditional operations, but it's a reset for how we think about who we are, who we serve, and what we can do better.
And I have more questions, but I also want to be mindful that we have an audience here. So I want to just take a moment and ask if anybody has any questions or remarks they want to share with the folks we are talking to. If so, please feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay, I've seen requests for information in the chat, which the team at Media Impact Funders has been really excellent about providing. So good. Okay, good. So
I'll throw in something, if that's okay. Hi, Eddie.
please, yes, Anil.
Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry, David, you had your hand up. Why don't you go first?
I'm just going to kind of reinforce a little bit about, not so much a question, more of a statement for us. When you spoke about learns, it really became a little bit about, for us, a kind of a great equalizer is a term I like to use, because we found that with digital work, we can reach into Charlotte's richest communities and Charlotte's poorest communities. And for us, a lot of that was getting into the wealthiest communities, which I think was extremely important. So I think as we also work to the underserved, it's also reaching those that have the influence and the means to do things, and that we might be able to help shape their thinking about things as they look and evolve. I just think to me, that became a really important learn that I wanted to make sure that we kind of talked about and just made point of, because without digital, I don't think we've been able to make that progress as quickly as we've been able to make it.
Yeah, my question was simply about the sort of the kinds of partnerships or collaborations, that are affected by necessity, and what kinds of, kind of hurdles have there been, particularly whether it's, working with more digital savvy, let's say, artists who maybe create using technology and bringing them in as equal partners, or just working with platforms, which may not be a big part of the organization's work, and really trying to bridge that vocabulary and work with those organizations, and how that works. It's a very broad kind of question. I'm just seeking any kind of insights on collaboration that might have emerged during this period.
We approached Live Culture Hub, which is the digital arm of La Mama in New York. They have been doing international work for years, and they've done live international collaborations, sort of very basic, but they have improved that platform. It's actually answering a question here from Whitesnake. It allows people to perform live interactively, using high def cameras, green screen technology, so it doesn't feel like Zoom. It does take a lot of planning. It does take a lot of design work, but it is possible. And we brought them in from the get-go to train us. We don't know anything about digital work. They guided us through what equipment we needed, the investments we needed to make, etc., and trained us on the Live Lab platform.
And Tom?
As we try to make digital part of everything we are doing, and particularly in our pre-K through 12 program, which is focused almost exclusively on students in underserved schools, but also in all of our social impact programs, like our biliteracy programs, our after-school programs, and so forth, the issue of digital equity is really front and center. And that is something that we will probably never have the wherewithal to step up to. And so we've been talking to a big international local media company that has made a significant commitment to helping get people over this digital threshold. And otherwise, we would never be able to do it. If we didn't have access to such partners, it just wouldn't happen at scale. So to us, that's the sort of very front and center.
Thank you. And I see a couple of hands up. Let me ask for Cerise, please pardon me if I'm mispronouncing your name. And then Umi, again, pardon if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yes, no, you did not mispronounce my name. Cerise is perfect. So I wanted to follow up on what Ralph said about partnering with La Mama and being trained in technology. We have been pioneering live, socially distanced, fully realized performance. And by that, I don't mean just people streaming from their living room, but But what we have done is we have invented a new plugin called Tutti Remote that manages latency. So performers from all over the country and all over the world can be performing in live and be broadcast, because the plugin syncs and manages the latency. So when the live audience hears them performing live, it's perfectly synced down to the one sample. And we also we ship our performers green screens and cameras, and they are they have to set everything up themselves, but we have been working in the game engine Unreal, and we are able then to take their live video feeds as they're singing and performing live, process them through the engine. So you get these live immersive sets, and all their feeds are in the set. So they look as if they're occupying the same space. And while the tech learning curve is high, I want to emphasize how inexpensive it is compared to making a pre-produced film or video. We cannot do filmmaking because as a small company, it's exorbitantly expensive. So talk about inaccessible technology. To make a fully produced, high production value digital offering, you have to be a wealthy company. So we have invented technology that is a huge leveler that allows individuals, artists, performers, tiny companies that have budgets of less than 500,000, which is where we are, to be able to produce fully realized socially distanced shows. So that's the direction we should go. Nobody's talked about the cost of making this digital stuff, because you'll see everybody who does the movie making and the pre-produced video are companies that have resources. And we're looking out for the little guy because we're a little guy too.
Thank you for that, Cerise. I appreciate that. And Umi.
Thanks so much. Loved what you said. And I think part of what we've been trying to do in thinking through this question of resources and technology, I have been really leaning into what the artists are doing. And I think, artists being creative people are people who are constantly innovating. And we were not just kind of thinking about the best of the technology that we can deliver, but also thinking about sort of low tech innovations that are already happening in the artist community, in the, educators community. And these are key kind of communities of people that we serve, particularly with, LGBTQ intersectionality. So yeah, we decided that we were going to lean into the low tech, partly because it was a quick response, and then we turned our exhibition into a zine, and then a zine that had 26 contributors that responded to COVID based on AIDS history's lessons, and that was actually the kind of the theme of our exhibition at the time when COVID happened. A digital zine, very easy to put together, and in fact, lots of teachers started teaching that in their classroom during COVID era, and we were able to kind of deliver that quickly. Another thing that we learned from artists was Zoom became ubiquitous, and it was a tool. It had lots of faulty parts, but it was essentially a broadcast tool that was cheaply available for us. So we used it to deliver a virtual reading featuring an LGBTQ cast, and it was a way to kind of memorialize Larry Kramer. He died last year, 2 years ago. So anyway, so I think there's sort of the high tech, and there's the mid tech, and there's also the low tech. And I think given kind of the circumstances and our budgetary constraints, we're able to kind of quickly turn around, and our biggest lessons came from the community. So I thought I would share that. Thanks.
That's fantastic, and it's also really helpful to hear the artist centered like that. Ralph?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that low tech and finding cheaper ways to actually do this is great. I do want to advocate for the artists, though. Part of what we're struggling, that we've committed to, is to make sure we're paying living wages, even if they are doing Zoom, even if they're doing this from their home. That I want to emphasize that artists need to get paid, and by going, we're an equity company. And so by doing this digital work, we've been forced to issue SAG contracts because it's the only way we're going to be able to do that. And we're also very committed to protecting the rights of artists. It's one thing. Right now, equity does not have a streaming contract, and we have to go to SAG. So even the industry itself is grappling with how to wrap itself around digital technology, but we cannot wait for them to figure it out.
Yeah. Eddie, could I just quickly add that there were a number of the profiled organizations who went crazy with creative ideas for how to get money into artists' pockets and to continue to pay them at a time when artists lost income more than, I think, almost any other employment segment, although Sunil could probably tell us exactly where we were in the hierarchy there. But one of the most creative was SF Jazz, who's not on the call today. They had these live stream jazz performances, and they created a digital tip jar. And they just asked the audience to do what they would do at a show. And they raised over $600,000 during the first year of the pandemic of people who wanted their contribution to go to the artists. And, sometimes it's not, as Cerise pointed out, like the giant idea. It's the little ideas like, let's try this. And it turns out that people want to do that. Who knew?
No, that's fantastic. And let me ask you, David, if you don't mind, I'd like to start with you because, you made both in the profile and in your remarks, passing reference to the learning curve that your team members were going through. And I'm curious for all of you, the experience you're having with the folks that you work with sort of day in, day out, and the learning curve that they're experiencing through this process.
The learning curve is, significant. I think it's, but I do think it requires an element of, of commitment, by our team. And I think that was the differentiator for us. That got us through the COVID period because we had to act immediately. I think with funding that we received, it allowed us now to go out and seek people with the specific skill sets to do that work. I think I tell in the profile about how my administrative assistant, immediately, in March of 2020, she immediately became the Zoom expert. We weren't doing Zoom as an institution, so it was kind of due to us. So those kind of things, I think, were the immediate response. And I think that was just being agile and being able to adapt. I think long term, I do think it's important to have the people with the specific skills to execute what level of digital experience you are trying to create. And for us, that has meant bringing on, very specific people to do specific tasks. And that makes it easier. The change in that, though, is the expectation now is that we can do more. So that workload becomes exponentially much more significant. And then, so we're finding now what's the capacity of these folks that we can do that. But I think it is. It's certainly not easy. I do think it takes a mindset. I think leaders like these, like my partners here on the panel today, they really have the vision to be able to say, this is the North Star. This is where we're going, and really believe in that. And then having certainly the other stakeholders believe we go that way, because you will be met with challenges, because sometimes you'll try something that won't work. And you still got to be committed to saying, hey, let's continue to do it. Let's continue to do it. Because we're still building audiences in those places, and we're also building, the skill sets. We're learning too about how we can, how we can do it from that standpoint.
Likewise, Ralph and Tom.
I know less about technology than pretty much every one of my 220 colleagues. So, everyone on the staff seems like a genius to me. I basically just do what I'm told. And, we're very good at sort of refreshing our strategic documents all the time. And so what they do is they very gently guide me when I have an idea to a place where there's actually something workable that can be done. They're very gentle with me. They're very good. And some of them are on the call right now, and I'm sure they're cringing in their cubicles, but it's just a fact. I'm the problem here, not the solution.
And Ralph, did you have anything to add?
I had to learn Google Analytics. Yeah, that's all.
And one of the things that comes across throughout all of your remarks has been your concern for people. We started with, who are your stakeholders, who are the people that you serve, and that has continued all the way through. And I just want to say how exciting that is in a program about technology, the human-centeredness of all of your remarks and all of your work. I wanted to take a moment because I know that we have in the audience David Haas from Wyncote Foundation. And if you don't mind my putting you on the spot for a moment, Mr. Haas, if you could just take a moment and talk about Wyncote Foundations. It feels to me like modeling what we're talking about in terms of grant makers, letting their partners lead and learn and be a partner in learning. So, Mr. Haas, if you don't mind.
Well, sure. Thanks, Eddie. Definitely, most of everything we do, we've learned from our grantees or partners. And also, we participate in, in terms of arts and culture, consume a lot and try to learn from that. I think our public media and journalism program supports a wider range of things, public media, documentary, journalism, and the technology piece is obviously, it is a digital media component, but in this case, in the service of other institutions. Honestly, there could be a whole nother seminar on social service organizations or community groups or whatever, but given that arts and culture is really about communication and engagement. This is a follow-up, we had meant to do a follow-up to the 2014 Like, Link, Share study, which at that time, digital strategies were relatively new and challenging and not understood. I initially wanted to do that because I didn't understand it. I was on a board where either people didn't take it seriously or some people were like, everything was about digital. And so this time we're going to follow up, but given the COVID situation, and there are so many interesting efforts and in my mind, pretty heroic, that it made us think further about, what's been going on in this is particularly stress test, but also where might this head in terms of new strategies. So that's kind of the view from here. And we're total students on this. I mean, Sarah obviously is deeply involved in this, and we've leaned on her a lot. Thanks.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And I think it's also a great closing. We're students in all of this. I just want to take a moment. I'm going to hand it off to Sarah and Vince, but I just want to take a moment to say thank you, David, Ralph, Tom. We are so grateful that you were able to bring your profiles to life in this way with all of us. And we are so grateful to get the opportunity to learn from you and to hear again how your care is centered throughout this process. So thank you. I want to say a great big thank you to Media Impact Funders, to the Wyncote Foundation, the Haas family and Kristen Ross, and to Sarah Lutman from 8 Bridges Workshop. Vince, let me hand it back to you.
Well, thank you, Eddie. And we're so appreciative of your wise and agile guide through really rich territory. And I will just say that it was really great to learn about the richness of the digital media experience. But we actually had an event in person. It was such a treat to do that about a week or so ago in person at our Media Impact Forum. And so as a small advertisement to our own content, I would just say that stay tuned. We will have the videos of the Media Impact Forum, which was held at the National Geographic Society with all of their amazing recording gear and things like that. So I think it will actually be a watchable conference. I'm hopeful that that's the case. I know the speakers were really wonderful and enlightening. So stay tuned for that. We'll have those videos up in about a week or so. But thank you, Eddie, and all of the speakers and all of the participants who joined us in this rich discussion. I hope we can do it again sometime very soon. Thank you all.